Are you kidding me?
I'm going to have us turned on, so wait for the signal. Okay, we are on. I would like to call the meeting to order. This is the Litchfield Budget Committee. This is November 2nd, and if we could start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Alrighty, we have a lot of people in the audience today, so we want to welcome everybody. Tonight is the beginning of our school district budget review, so I think that's why we have such a good crowd. Review and revision, public input, so almost jumped right over that. I was so excited to have public. Is there any public input tonight? And there will be another one towards the end of the meeting, so if you don't have anything to say now, there's still an opportunity. Alrighty, review and additions to the agenda. I'm not aware of any changes, so we'll jump right in. We have two sets. Yes?
I would like to make one change in my presentation schedule.
Alrighty.
I would have the curriculum director's presentation for next week. I think Nancy is new to the district, and I think it would be better if she was not the lead-off person. So I would like to have her go next week, if that's okay with you.
That would probably be nice for her, right?
That would be a little bit easier. I have to have a chance to look at what we do.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
No problem. All right, so we'll move curriculum development for next week. Anything else? All right, we have two sets of minutes. We have October 12th and October 26th. So does anybody have anything they need to change on October 12th?
No. I'd actually make a motion to approve the minutes of October 12th. Second. As written.
It's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain?
I abstain.
Okay, so we have,
Who seconded that?
Jen.
Thank you.
so 7-0-1. October 26th, and just that is when we really started getting into some numbers. I did check all the motions and amounts with my notes, and they do match, if anybody didn't have a chance to check that.
I only had one, on page 5, it says, I say we can't keep spending legal fees. I wanted to clarify that's without considering the expected recovery compared to the cost of achieving that recovery. Not that I'm opposed to spending, it's just, that makes sense. Here, I made a note.
I got it. No, I got it. I just don't write as fast as I think.
To be honest, I didn't have the chance to review them, so I don't know if we have to do them tonight or...
No, I know. We can table it to next week.
If you want to wait, we can wait.
I just wanted my change in before I forgot.
I don't know if I'm the only one, so...
Some people didn't have power for a couple of days, so it could be a little
That's true
behind.
too. That's true. I forgot about that.
We'll go with that.
Yeah, let's save them then for next week. So there's one change to them, and we'll just postpone that for next week. Correspondence, we had a lot of emails over the last week, just updates and agendas, and health insurance census, which was a town one, and I think that's it, just electronic copies of the budget.
Cindy, this week we got that?
Yes.
I only got 3 emails.
Okay.
Did it not get distributed?
Maybe I did not. Where's the electronic? Maybe I did not forward that. Let me find that again.
So that's correspondence for next week then.
Okay. All right, yeah. Sorry about that. So that I don't, other than just general business stuff that's going to come up tonight, I don't have anything else, and I will forward the electronic copies of the agenda. Excuse me, of the budget. So that's it. So then we jump right into budget review, and I believe the superintendent is going to start us off. If anybody did not get a copy, there's a printed out copy, and I have a couple of extras if there are folks in the audience that want to follow along. I do have a couple of extras up here.
Well said.
Jason's gonna run it.
Oh, thank you, Jason.
So welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the Budget Committee. Again, it's our pleasure to come to you with our budget and to review the budget with you. We're very pleased with the budget we bring to you. It's the lowest increase in budget since I've been here. It's right around 3%. It's a little bit of variability because some numbers are changing a little bit as we get more information. But our recommended budget is actually only 3% above our last year's budget. And I think that when you look at inflation and you look at all of the other things that are going on, I think that's an excellent budget to bring forward to you, and we will present it to you for your review. In terms of the strategic priorities in the district, our priorities would include the following. Number one, full-day kindergarten. We believe that is our very top priority for the district, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The one-on-one computer model that we started in the district several years ago, which this year has the entire high school with one-on-one computers. We will continue that model next year, and our goal would be to have the one-on-one computer model extended throughout the middle school. The Learning Commons Library is our third priority. The Learning Commons is a more current model of how libraries should operate. The model of a library that many of us are familiar with is with the books being static, people coming in and being quiet, taking the book out quietly, and reading. The Learning Commons model is a much more dynamic model. It is a model where we would establish smaller areas for collaborative work amongst students. We would have technology available for them. Of course, in the high school and hopefully next year in the middle school, all of the students would bring their own technology with them because they would all have Chromebooks with them because they have them. And it's an area where there would be a maker's space, which is a place where we can have students investigate various kinds of creative thinking, various kinds of creative ideas, perhaps even the construction of some kind of actual substantial kind of structures. So we're looking at a library that is much more reflective of what the real world will be for these kids when they get out, and the idea of using information in a very dynamic and changing environment. And then lastly, I would like to express my sincere appreciation. The last several years, what we've been trying to do is to get better and better at using 3-year actual expenditures to develop our budget. And this year, we continue that model, and I think this year we've made improvements, and Corey, I thank Corey very much for his hard work in getting the budget to where it is, and for having it to you in what I believe is our best attempt at a real actual expenditure look over the last 3 years, and Corey can get into that with you in detail. If I look at the full-day kindergarten program, we believe that the money spent in early intervention is the best money that any public school system spends. We know by all the research out there that children who are not at reading literacy by grade 3 and math numeracy by grade 4 will never catch up. We look at kids who are off grade levels in the 3rd and 4th grade, and it's almost impossible to get them to grade level, even when you take and give them an extra class or an extra 2 classes a day to try to catch them up. So we believe that having the full-day kindergarten will allow all of the students to come in with an equal kind of an experience into the 1st grade, and it would allow our teachers to have a much better idea of what they're getting in terms of the product coming in. We recognize that we still have immigration, and we recognize that we will have some students that will not choose to go to our full-day kindergarten. But we do believe that the vast majority of students in the community will access full-day kindergarten. And we also believe that by having full-day kindergarten and having students get up to speed, so to speak, with their learning in the kindergarten years, that will decrease, there's some really strong data that shows that will decrease the number of children who are not, who are going to be referred to special ed as we get better and better at what we're doing. And the idea, of course, is that all children will be in a core curriculum with rare exceptions and get the education that we need to give them. So we do believe that it will show socialization. A lot of kids coming in that have not had any school at all, socialization that first year is a real challenge for them. And we believe that socialization is a really critical key for children to be able to survive in the kindergarten year, in the first grade year. So for all of these, we really do believe that kindergarten is the most important single thing we can do this year to improve our education and to give the community the best possible pre-K through 12 system that it can. I know that kindergarten has been discussed previously in the district, and you all set, Jason? And that in 2005, it is my understanding that there was a vote by the community to have kindergarten if it was funded by the state. And I think subsequent to that, what happened was that the kindergarten was implemented in the state and in the district, and it was not full-day kindergarten, but half-day kindergarten. I want to also state that when you look at the entire state, the data shows us that somewhere between 75 and 80% of all districts in the state have full-day kindergarten. We are not one of the leading districts. In fact, we are one of the trailing districts in terms of our early education programs. So we believe that the community has had an opportunity to accept kindergarten and has an opportunity to vote on it. We have also, in the previous capital plans for the community, there has been a capital plan requiring classrooms for kindergarten being constructed. We're not looking for brick and mortar classrooms. We are looking for portable classrooms that we could use for the kindergarten, and we can explain more about what we mean by portable classrooms. It would be what I call a fourplex classroom, which is 4 classrooms that are together, and they would have a corridor down the middle. It is still a portable, it's not a permanent building, but it's a lot nicer building. It's a lot more like an actual small school than if you have the duplex portables, which have no real sense of an enclosure. And then we also believe that the Keno revenues and the proposal in the new RSA from the state will support our kindergarten with an additional $100,000 in this year and in coming years. So we believe that also it's a good year to go forward with the full-day kindergarten. So again, that is our number one priority. Our second priority is the one-on-one computing program. Thanks to the high school's lead, we now have a computer for every student in the high school. And all of the students are using their computers on a daily basis with classroom instruction, and our teachers are going forward more and more with classroom instruction in their classrooms using the computers. We would like to continue that model in the middle school next year and have the middle school completely outfitted with one computer for each student. The way we would propose to do that would be to take some of the current, what we call computer labs, which have Chromebooks in them, and disband them because we would no longer need computer labs. We could take those and dedicate those to one-on-one students. We would also take the current seniors and their computers and allocate their computers to the middle school when they graduate. And then we would have to purchase some computers in order to fulfill all of our students' needs to have a Chromebook. And certainly we can go over that in more detail. But we don't believe we have to purchase necessarily a lot of new computers, but we will have to purchase some additional computers beyond where we are at the present time. I would also say that in the middle school, the board has also allowed us to go forward. Algebra 1, high school level algebra, is taught in the middle school, as well as Spanish 1, high school level Spanish 1. And it was the feeling of the board, justifiably, that the Algebra 1 and Spanish 1 students in the middle school were unfairly competing with high school students who all had the Chromebook computers to use, and that the teaching and instructional practices that we're trying to get for the Algebra 1, no matter if it's middle or high school, and Spanish 1, is on the Chromebooks, using the Chromebooks as an integral tool of the learning process. So we do have computers, we do have the Chromebooks for the Algebra 1 students and the Spanish 1 students. Now, just to clarify, a lot of those will be the same student who are taking Algebra 1 and Spanish 1. So there'll be a lot of crossover. It's not like we've got 25 plus 25, it's probably 25, and then it's probably a very similar pool of students that we have. So we will have that in there. And lastly, on the computers, we believe that, and Scott can certainly talk to this, and Tom can talk to the middle school, and you have an opportunity to talk with Tom and Scott. Scott believes that at the elementary level, as I do, that there will be a hybrid model in Griffin School. In other words, the real young children will be using some computers, but not like we would use even in the middle school. And there may also be a need for other than Chromebooks in order to fill the needs of all of our youngest children. However, we do believe that it's really critical that we have a really good computer background, a computer environment for Griffin Memorial School so that they learn and get used to using computers as they are able to, so that when they go to the middle school, they will have all of the requisite skills to be very successful. So the one-on-one computer is our second major goal. Our third goal for the year is the Learning Commons. And again, the Learning Commons is a different view of how we use our libraries. It's more dynamic, it's more open, there would be soft furniture, there would be areas where students can sit and aggregate together, they could cooperatively learn together. It's not a be quiet area, it's an area where we expect a lot of dialogue, it's an area where kids would be using computers together. And like I mentioned, we would also hope eventually to have things called maker spaces there, where there would be various kinds of things, apparatus, materials where kids could practice on kind of creatively making a particular structure. So it's a really different model. I think as we go forward with libraries, we all recognize that having a book, I love to read from a book. I still really get a great deal of enjoyment out of reading from books. However, I would say 95% of the information I get on a day-to-day basis is actually on my little handheld, without question. And so I think our children are in an environment where books are still important, but the use of computers is a thing which they have to have from the time they're in elementary school till the time they will go into the work environment, and we're trying to get them prepared for that as much as we possibly can. So again, we believe that this is an integral component of our district, and the Learning Commons will be going forward. It's interesting that this year, and I'll ask Tom and Scott to talk a little bit more about this when they have a chance, we've already made significant advances at the middle school. We've had consultants come in and provide us with direction, and we've already made physical changes in the middle school, trying to adapt it more to the Commons model. And I know that the same is true at GMS, where the librarian and Scott have worked very hard to migrate that. And I know that Andrea Ange up here at the high school has also been working on the model. So we're already working on that model, and it's not a major expense for the budget, but it is a major goal for the district in the coming year. Lastly, again, I want to express my sincere appreciation to Corey. He has taken the 3-year averages of actual expenses in the budget and really made them a lot more meaningful, and I believe we've culled out a lot of the areas that the Budget Committee has looked at in the past years. And I think that would be the end of that. I believe, though, I would like to go back with a little bit more explanation of the kindergarten. And what I would like to go back and just explain this. Putting my cards on the table right at the beginning of the dialogue. In order to fund the full-day kindergarten, we need a total of $500,000. We will get $100,000 approximately from the state. We will also take 2 current middle school teaching positions and 1 grade school teaching positions and reassign them to the kindergarten program. We will take and have 2 full-time teachers additional at the kindergarten program. And then one of the teachers, one of those 3 teaching positions, will be divided into 2 paraprofessionals in the kindergarten. The kindergarten classrooms, we will need 4 full-time teachers for 4 kindergartens and 4 paras. And in order to do that, we are suggesting that we would take 2 middle school teachers and 1 grade school teacher, take those positions and reassign them to the kindergarten, using 2 of those positions as teachers and 1 of those positions to fund the 2 para positions that we will need. That would be a total of $250,000 in actual money, which means we have $250,000 by reassigning teachers. $100,000 from the state would be a total of $350,000. That leaves us with $150,000 additional money. You'll note, we are not asking for any warrant articles or additional money outside of our operational budget to fully fund this. So the only other place the additional $150,000 has been taken from is the current operational budget. So I want to make it clear that the 3% increase in our operational budget will fully fund a full-day kindergarten program. So I just want to make that clear, and certainly Corey can go into that in more detail as we go down the road. Thank you, Madam Chair. If there are any questions about my 30,000-foot view, I'd be glad to answer them, but if not, we'll go right into the numbers guy.
I just have sort of a thinking out loud in terms of the one-to-one computing and taking computer classrooms, and they're not needed anymore as computer classrooms. Does that help then our space issues at the elementary and the middle and the high school? And then that too makes me think of this rearranging of the libraries. What does that do to the traditional size of the library that's sort of been needed in the past? And how does that change what we have as libraries? Because I know GMS is a very small library.
Right.
And really so is LMS.
Right.
So what does that help us?
Let me, first, a lot of these computers are actually on carts. They're not actually separate, dedicated computer classrooms. So these carts wheel around to different spots for teachers, and so some of the computers we'll be using aren't really dedicated in a single room. Certainly, some of the room utilization spaces will be opened up as we move along. However, the library is going to need additional space for kids if we're going to have more of a dynamic environment. And so I know that at the middle school we're taking the library, but we're also adding another room to that library to be able to use for kids to get together and do, louder activities and more opportunities like that. So I would ask that the principals might address your question a little bit more succinctly than I could, but I do believe some of these are going to come not from actual dedicated rooms, but from literally carts with 25 computers that we mobile and we move them around to different places, and that some of them will be coming from a computer classroom, and those will be migrating to other uses, and I'll ask the principals to address that. Thank you for the question.
Any comments?
Yeah, so I probably should know the answer to this, but I don't. So is full-day kindergarten the only option, or would parents still have the option for half-day if they didn't feel like their child was developing?
By RSA, we have to continue to offer the option of half-day kindergarten for children, and Scott can brief you more on that when he gets here if he wants. He may not want, but in all seriousness, no. In all seriousness, Scott has already thought that through, and we already have a plan for if we have a very few half-day kindergartens, all the way up to if we had a full 20 students who want to take half-day kindergarten, and Scott has already made that proposal. So we are considering that, and the RSA does require us to offer half-day kindergarten for any parents that want that.
Okay.
Any other questions? All righty then.
Well, thank you very much for your patience.
To relocate, or
You do what you
can I
want.
stay here?
So
do you
I
prefer?
guess next on the list is, if we jump right in, is special services then, if we're going to push curriculum off, or?
Did you want Corey to give an overview?
I have an overview if you would like me to.
Oh, all righty.
Like that.
Okay.
Do you mind if I stay here, or would you like me to go
Oh, I
over
lumped
the?
those together. You know what, it might be better if you're, if you're comfortable and set up there, let's not rearrange you, but,
I've got my stuff, I got my book.
okay.
I can run over, actually, Jim can read my computer.
Look at me reading a computer. Probably better than paper. If you need me, I can't do it. Get lost.
It's good. I think I have everything here, I hope. Hello. So I had provided some information to you guys earlier today, mainly a memo giving an overview of the overall budget, how we got to where we are. And also some cover sheets that go along with the actual departmental budgets within your budget books to kind of give an overview of the percent change within each of those budgets, and I'll touch on each one of those today. The original budget that came in from the administrators at the school levels and the department heads came in at about 4.5%. Through looking through the budget and considering some things as strategic, we were able to bring that down to approximately 3%. There are some items that I will mention in here as well that the budget tends to be a bit of a living document where, as new numbers come in, some things have come to my attention and our attention over the past couple days that will have to be added in, and some changes will be coming before the next meeting. As Jim had mentioned, our main goal within the district is the full-day kindergarten. Taking that into account, we took the LMS one-to-one initiative and the Learning Commons model, and we pulled back and we put them into what we are considering a strategic budget, which I provided a listing to you all as well to kind of show where those items came out. And by strategic budget, you'd be looking at management of the fund balance at year end. If there's a listing of items and we have amounts left in the fund balance, which we tend to have, providing that list to the school board and going forward and spending out of the fund balance while still being able to return to the town for offsetting taxes. After those things were taken out, the increase is, at this time, $624,000. And as I noted, that will be subject to change as we go to next week because there are some items I've identified in here as well. We also reviewed, me and Holly, our HR director, reviewed our salaries and benefits lines over the past several years and noted that over the past several years, we tend to spend about 96-97% of those budgets, and in taking that into consideration, we went through and felt comfortable making an attrition reduction at this time to bring the budget down about $200,000 within those health and dental lines. Over the past week or so, we were provided with some information regarding the guaranteed maximum rate for health and dental insurance. We have been notified that the dental insurance rate, which we budgeted at 5%, actually came in at 2.3%, so we will be making a calculation to provide for next week, reflecting that reduction. We also noted that on November 8th, next week, we will receive that amount from our health insurance provider as well. We are expecting that to come in less than 5%, which is what we budgeted, so we'll provide that calculation as well. We were also notified November 1st was the notification date for intent to retire. There are 2 notifications that we have received. One is already in the budget. We will have to add another one in the amount, I think it's about $21,000 for salaries and benefits to account for that as well. That will be included in next week's salary and benefit presentation. And let's see. It was also noted today, we just also oversight on our part, that the lacrosse program has been added to our budget. The coaches are not included in this budget this time. We will have to calculate that and bring those coaches into the budget. I'd also like to, there are some major items within the budget, such as things that we can't necessarily control due to contractual increases for transportation, tuition. So I've noted in here what those impacts are for transportation, those daily rates for buses that went up from $305 per day to $320 per day for our regular transportation buses, plus we have to reflect the special ed transportation that we have to provide. We were notified over the past couple weeks that the rate that we are paying for a particular route in our special ed transportation has gone up from $97.50 to $165 a day this year, and is anticipated to go up to about $220 next year. So we have to add that amount back into special ed transportation.
Can I bid on that contract? I mean, thanks.
Can we use Uber?
That's an increase of over 20,000.
I would expect that.
That's $22,000 increase.
I'm ready to retire, I can run that through. So.
And we did receive that. It was an invoice that came in, and we questioned it, and
Did they give any indication?
They,
Gas hasn't gone up that much.
no, they actually told us that the 165 rate is what they should have been charging us for the past 2 years.
So where does
So.
the whatever come from?
220.
What's that?
Where does the 220 come from? If one, so they're,
Per day. It's the per-day bus rate.
Just, if I might, Madam Chair? We had a meeting with the superintendent's group last Friday, and one of my colleagues is dealing with the fact that they cannot get bus drivers to drive the bus. So they've had to really change the hours so that the kids are going crazy hours. And it's my understanding that the community, even though in my opinion the superintendent had nothing to do with this, is very upset. I don't know what the conclusion will be, but Dr. Edelbach, the commissioner, stated that he had contacted Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts bus companies to determine if there were any additional capacity bus drivers in any of those states. No state had any additional capacity, nor were they willing to share with us any names. It is extremely difficult to get qualified bus drivers right now with the unemployment market. It depends on who you're talking to, 1.3, 2.3, 2.7%. And those bus drivers that are good bus drivers can now work full-time from 8 to 4 with a commercial company and get full benefits and get more money. So I think the bus driving, it's easy to say go someplace else, but where is it? That's the problem. So I would welcome anybody in the community who would like to get into the transportation business and bid, and it would be a bid, obviously, and bid on our RFP. I do come from a community where a community member did make that decision and has done very well, both in terms of providing transportation and financially. So I say that not having not seen that. I have, and I have seen a person in a community who went into the bus business and has done very well. But the reason that the bus companies can go from 165 to 202 is because, candidly, there aren't any options out there. There may be one option, that's it. So I just want you to be aware of that. We certainly are very, very concerned about the transportation costs.
So does that factor then into considering where this route goes, maybe finding a closer school or something that's actually within a route that's currently being serviced?
We certainly are looking at that. And
Because at 22,000, even if the nearest school is, 10 grand more, you're still saving money by tying it, piggybacking.
we're certainly
the
looking
route.
at that. And in fact, if I might just extend a little bit longer, when you look at the special education budget increase, are you going to go over that?
Oh, yeah.
I will mention it. It's in here, yes.
I read ahead.
Yeah, well, no, there's there's numbers we can control, and there's numbers we can't control. So, I mean, there's a number in special, there's two numbers in special ed we can't control that account for all but 2% of the increase in the special ed budget. And I just want to have that clear before the special ed director has an opportunity to present, that in the money that she can control, 2% more. The money she can't control is what's causing the remaining 15% in the budget to go up. So Corey, I'm sure, will explain that.
So the $220 a day is for how many kids, or is that a special education question when we get to that?
I believe it's one. That's one run.
So it's one child, and this is a year away, because this is the budget that will start next July, so it will be students that will be or a student that will be transported next September. So a lot can happen. I understand the tight
I agree.
market, but a lot can happen between now, if we're motivated, a lot can happen between now and next September.
I would agree.
So just to keep that perspective.
Thank you.
All right, with that said, I'll just do a quick overview of each department and how that's moving. Within the SAU 27 budget, it's moving about $4,400. That's due to an increase in conference and workshops with a new superintendent coming in. We would expect new superintendent probably to be going to more conferences and workshops within that year, within the first year. The school board has an overall decrease of $451. There's a bit of a explanation in there. There is one part Collective bargaining for the LEA and LSS contracts will be starting up next year, so there is a potential that we have put money in there for a budget for legal expenses. There is a chance that those legal expenses could be higher than we're anticipating with that budget. HR budget, just general stuff. There's a decrease of $1,700, a reduction of workshops, professional services, and advertising. Salaries and benefits, which Holly will go through next week. I previously went through the attrition reduction that we had gone through and done. You'll also notice in the function 2900 line, that was money related to the collective bargaining agreements that were put into effect last March when they were voted in. Those are just the total amounts were in there for the FY18 budget. That, with the new contracts going into FY19, will be reallocated across the functions and objects. Technology, when you're looking at the numbers in that technology budget, it's going to look like a large increase. There's a effect of the amounts that we spent ahead, FY17 coming in. If you add the impact of that, the impact of that spend ahead from last year, it's not as dramatic. The amounts that Jason is budgeting for his technology budget are based on a 5-year plan. The spend ahead didn't change that 5-year plan, so he's still moving forward with that plan. He'll speak to that. Curriculum had the same type of impact. We spent ahead $48,000 at the end of last year for textbooks and such. If you take that into account, that budget's actually going down from year to year, if you take into account the impact of the spend ahead. GMS, the increase mainly due to the first year cost of equipping the new classrooms for full-day kindergarten. You'll see that LMS and CHS both had budget decreases. Special services we've talked about. Business office, there's a decrease in there of $6,200. Part of that has to do with the contract that we have with a company that does an actuarial valuation for our GASB. It's called GASB 45, reporting within the financial statements. Discussions with the auditor and my own past experience as an auditor, it's not a necessary expense. It's a $7,000 contract with a company that the benefit is very, very little to our district or our financial statements. Buildings and grounds, mostly increases due to the implementation of full-day kindergarten. If you take those pieces out, there's actually a reduction to the facilities budget of 0.62%, and the food service budget overall is going down about 1.3%. With that, I'll be here, obviously, to answer any questions as the departments go through.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there are more sheets behind that, so if you go through it this week and you have questions, funnel them through me, or bring them to the table next week.
Are we all set?
Yes, welcome.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'm Devin Bandersky. I'm the Director of Special Services here in the Litchfield School District. I'm just going to start with providing an overview in terms of special services and some highlights from the budget, and then I can open up to any questions that you have. Special Services Department, I oversee special education, 504, English language learners, homeschool, homeless, court-involved, foster care placements, and anything else that comes my way. So all of those have legal requirements. So there's federal laws, there's policies and procedures that I have to follow to ensure that we're meeting the needs of the students. So when I'm developing a budget over a year in advance, I'm taking into account those legal requirements along with the needs of the students and trying to prepare a budget based on the needs of the students that I know of in the moment. So keep that in mind. I know some of you are returning budget committee members, so you've heard the conversation around sort of the variability that can transpire in special services over the year. So I did my best to lay out some of those changes. So as you'll see when you're looking at my budget, some of the increase areas come from professional services, tuition, and transportation. And like was already stated, there are certain things that we can not control because they are directed per IEP. So when students have educational disabilities under special education, we create a plan and a team of multitude of individuals sits around and determines what are the needs of the student and what services do we need to provide. So when you look at professional services, these are all contracted service providers that we utilize to fulfill IEP requirements. So we have a teacher of the deaf, teacher of the visually impaired, we have BCBA to provide behavioral services, we have assistive technology evaluations that we must provide, we have a full-time nurse for a student, and a variety of other things. So you'll see an increase in that area. We've had an increase in the amount of services provided by our teacher of the deaf, so that accounts for a huge percentage of the increase in that area. When you look at tuition as a whole, we had new laws that went into effect March 24th of this school year, and it afforded our in-state, out-of-district schools to increase their tuition rates by 5%. So that's accounted for in the rates for students that are within state lines. We do have schools that we utilize beyond state lines, and of course the tuitions for out-of-state students is a bit higher than in-state students. When we're looking for placements for students with disabilities, there's a variety of factors that we have to take into account. So sometimes it's not as easy as looking at the proximity of a school. We have to take into account the area of disability of the student and whether or not the school is approved to serve that area of disability. We also take into account what are the things that they offer. Are they going to be able to meet the needs of the student? So there's a lot of thought that goes into finding an appropriate placement. Over the years, there's been a decrease in the amount of in-state special education placements that we have available to us, partly because there's districts that are creating in-house programs. So with enrollments going down, there were some places that needed to close. With that being said, with the fiscal environment being what it was, some of our neighboring districts that may have considered allowing us to tuition in a student, we're not doing so just because of budgets. So when we're looking at placements, I'll contact neighboring school districts because that's going to be more, much more cost effective. But sometimes their programming is not going to line up, or they're not accepting students or whatnot. So there's a lot of thought that goes into finding an appropriate placement. With that being said, you'll see an increase in that area. All of the students identified in that area are students that are currently in placements, with the exception of one listed there, which is conversations have already been held, so I've included that in my budget because it is a big impact if it's not in there. When you look at transportation, you've already heard that there's sort of increase in costs that are beyond our control. We have in the past had a bank of transportation providers that we've been able to go to. And so our first stop has to be for a student because that's what's in our contract. I'll contact them. If they cannot provide the transportation, we kind of would go right down the list to all the transportation providers who can do it, what's the cost. But we have had a transportation company that's come in and sort of purchased 3 of them. And so now they're all part of one transportation company. We have the shortage of bus drivers. So sometimes partway through the year I have difficulty finding a transportation provider because school is up and running. This was the first time that I had difficulty from the get-go finding a transportation provider to provide transportation. There's also other things that come up that are unexpected with respect to my transportation line, and that's providing transportation to students who are identified as being homeless. So when a family loses their home, is having to live with other people, is living in a car, a hotel, anything like that, we're responsible for making sure and maintaining that child's current placement, which requires us to find a way to transport them to school. So oftentimes, we will try to cost share with the district where they're now residing, but those are things that change throughout the school year. So when we're putting it together, we put a certain amount there, but there's some years that we end up cost sharing with more districts than other years. So just to keep that in mind. Other increases you will see is about, I think 4 years ago now, we purchased laptops for our special services staff, case managers, related service providers, so that they can fulfill their obligations in terms of paperwork and data collection and so forth. So you'll see the replacement of those because they're getting near the end of their time frame with us. So you'll see that increase there. Other than that, it's pretty consistent of things that we've budgeted in the past in terms of supplies and materials for all of our service providers, evaluation protocols, which is a requirement. We have to have those protocols because we're responsible for evaluating a multitude of areas for students. So I don't know if you like to open it up for questions. Be happy to answer them.
Questions, comments? I know one of the things that I like to look at is trends, big picture trends over time, because there's no doubt that these students need these services at this moment.
Right.
But when I look at trends, and I have trends going back, I mean, I have data going back to 2013, what we see in special education, because we know exactly what we have today, but we don't know, kind of like the transportation issue, we don't know in September of next year, a year, and then January of 2020, when this budget then continues to cover, we don't know the things that are going to happen. And so there is a lot of fluctuation. So one of the things that we see, for example, in handicap tuition, looking at the percentage of what we budget versus what we end up actually using. So it's not about which kids are here, which kids aren't getting serviced, it's trends over time. Kind of like the trends with what Holly did, and they took a $200,000 attrition. So think of it sort of in terms of that. We have ranged in the last 3 to 4 years in tuition, we only spend 86% of what was originally budgeted in the fall when we received the budget. When we look at professional services, which is $330, we traditionally, again, on average, our 3-year average is 73% is what we spend. Our 4-year average is 74% we spend versus what was originally asked for. Looking at, and so transportation's getting tight. We've ranged anywhere from 66% usage to 92% in 2017. So when we look at the trends, there's places that we can make reductions without harming a single student, without changing a student's placement. Just looking at history, you can take small percentage reductions, not even come close to the worst case scenario. So we 96% is our worst case scenario. You could take a 2 or 3 or 4% reduction, not even come close to the worst case scenario. So I want the budget committee to consider that. Yes, these students exist today. Yes, we know what they cost, we know where they're placed, we know what the buses cost today. But we're talking 18 months, a year, 18 months from now, what's it going to look like? And it always looks very different. It always comes in, I think with the exception of 1 year, a long time ago, it comes in lower. So I just want to, those broad trends, I want us to think about as we go forward.
So can I just ask for clarification, because at least it was my understanding, and maybe this has changed, but isn't there like an agreement that this money goes back to the taxpayer if we are cautious and we say, yes, we will go with this budget?
The majority of it does go back to the taxpayer. The difference is between now, in a couple of years, for example, 2017, the year that we actually have end-of-year data for, the Budget Committee reduced something like $160,000. The district then, when the budget passed, reduced another $96,000. that money, because it was reduced before the budget went into effect, that money doesn't go back to the taxpayer, because it got rearranged before the budget was finalized after it passed.
Got it.
So the majority of it does go back to the taxpayer. The concern is when you're hit with a budget that has increases, you're hit with, proposals, such as you have a priority of kindergarten, full-time kindergarten, is if you can reduce that bottom line without affecting education, you have a better chance of passing the budget that's going to get those priorities that are included in the budget.
Got it.
I would just concur with your observation that our goal would be to return the money from the special ed budget that we do not expend to the taxpayers, and we try to keep that as a separate pool of money that we would return. And I won't comment beyond that. That certainly is the goal of the district and has been the goal since a gentleperson's agreement has been reached. So thank you. And I would also say that I also agree with you. It is one of the budgets that has the most variability from when we actually agree on the budget to when we expend the money. And because of the change of students and the change of placements, special ed is very difficult to predict. And I will always argue that we do need some leeway in our special ed budget so that if the predictions do hit the 96 or 97% point, or even 100% point, we are able to expend that money and then return the remainder. So thank you very much for the time.
One thing I would note, though, is there have been years we've taken substantial cuts, and how many times have we hit the reserve?
Never.
So there is a reserve fund. We have looked, there have been tight years, and those increases have always been able to be absorbed by looking at trends. So yes, when we have, what's the ideal extra we should have? 100 grand, 200 grand, 700 grand? We can all talk about what that number is, but realistically, our job is what does it take to make this budget work, especially knowing we have a reserve fund available. Because yes, we can overtax our neighbors, but that's not what our job is. Our job is what budget is necessary to fund the schools, knowing what we know.
And it's mostly a strategic thing, like we talked about with the town. Strategically, what's the best thing to do to get a budget passed? This is one of those places that strategically, you might be able to take some reductions, like I said, without actually impacting the education to special education or to other education departments. So it's a strategic thing.
May I say one more thing, Madam Chair? I will absolutely agree with Gary's point, though. How much is the ideal amount of money? We really don't know. We don't know if it's 0 or 100 or 500,000. And so we will be proposing this year that we would ask the voters to go back and revisit the opportunity of the district to set aside some of the fund balance, which the Budget Committee still has full control over before we can expend it. So we will be bringing that forward this year, and hopefully the Budget Committee will think that's a good idea, because then that would alleviate some of our concern about tight funding and having to have that extra money, because we could always come back to the Budget Committee if we had a year where unexpected expenses hit us very hard. So thank you for the time, and I'll try to not speak too much.
You're welcome to speak anytime you have something to add.
I remember you said that, Madam Chair.
And if I could just, to Jim's point, there is, it's called the 2.5% contingency fund. And I think there has been an attempt in the past to put that into play, put it across to the voters. I think there is a little bit of confusion in what exactly the 2.5% contingency means, where some people may have felt that it was another capital reserve with the trustees of trust funds. It's not. It's a reservation of fund balance. It's 2.5% of your gross appropriation that is set aside as a reservation of your fund balance, and you need the approval of the Budget Committee and the Commissioner of Education before you can go into deficit appropriations. It allows you to spend money in emergency situations. So whereas we've had, over the past couple of years, some difficulties in passing the Capital Reserve Fund for Special Education, the 2.5% reserve of fund balance would give us somewhere to go if one of these needs that would arise.
So I think what you're talking about is not directly related to special ed. It's kind of like what the selectmen have, which is
Yes.
that they can set aside to kind of even out tax years.
But it's not a funded set-aside.
Okay,
I think
so-
that's the...
So
that's the
Litchfield
problem.
doesn't have that, so it sounds like maybe that's what there's going to be a
Yep.
warrant article coming?
Yes, it would be a warrant article. It's not a monetary impact. It's a reservation of fund balance that we would need the authority to go into deficit appropriation if emergency was to arise.
Okay.
So if you do have the situation where a student comes in that has extreme needs and the district has to pay for it and it's not in our budget because we reduce down to a certain point, it gives us an opportunity to address that.
And it
Like-
covers more than just special ed, so.
It does, it does.
Yes.
If your roof were to fall in one of your schools and you need to replace that. I came over to the Litchfield School District from Goffstown School District. Last year, they had the 2.5% contingency reserve in place, and they had a need for an emergency drainage project at their high school. It went to the Budget Committee, they presented to the Budget Committee, it went forward to the Commissioner of Education, he approved it, and they were able to do the project. Because it was an item that they didn't foresee coming, and it was an emergency that came up that they were able to address.
And that was, and I forget how many years ago, it was actually a town vote a number of years ago. It only came before the voters once. It did fail. It has not been brought up since, but I do think, like, the selectmen have that opportunity, or the option, to have the fund balance that can smooth out an unexpected tax increase or an unexpected expense. So when we get to warrant articles, I'll be interested to hear that.
Just one correction, we can't dip into it for an unexpected expense. We can only do it to offset taxes that
Taxes,
year,
yeah.
right?
So that's why I'm curious, when we get there, to understand the differences, because,
And I'll reiterate that the Budget Committee still would control any request, and the Commissioner of Education would have to approve any request. So the Budget Committee would still retain its ability to say no.
all right, so back to special ed, we kind of took away from this. Any other comments, questions in special services? Okay, again, if, as you go through it during the week, you come up with anything, let me know, and I'll forward it on.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Michelle.
That's right.
All right, it looks as though Campbell High School is next.
Good evening. So I am Bill Lonigan.
I got the electron.
Okay,
I am the principal here.
Welcome.
At Campbell, thanks, good to be back again. A little different from last year. Last year I was a deer in the headlights. I feel a little bit more comfortable this year, having gone through it now for my second time. We've had a great start to the school year, just anecdotally speaking. Kids are doing what they should be. Lessons are being learned, athletics, co-curriculars, everything's going really well. We've got a number of new teachers here, and they've gotten off to a good start. As far as our budget process, it's nice to see a 1% or 1.6% decrease. I think our teachers have been sensitive overall to looking at what their requests are and looking at what they've requested in the past, and I paid particular attention to them as I was discussing this with them. I will say that the one-to-one technology program has been a tremendous asset to us already. And it's interesting because I think in terms of its budget, aside from the paying for the Chromebooks, I think it's kind of revenue neutral. I think we've decreased our use of some workbooks and things like that, so you'll see those moved out of the budget. But I think you'll also see teachers who are requesting the use of applications in education that might cost a little bit of money they weren't necessarily anticipating previously. So, but I think it's been great for the kids and great for the teachers for the one-to-one to come in. We have some cost savings related to NEASC. We're in the they're going to come in and do our accreditation visit in May, so some heavy costs were incurred this year as a result of that. So those you will not see in our administration budget this year. They'll be significantly decreased. We have fewer vocational students, so you'll see a reflection in the number of students who are going out to the vocational schools, which for me is kind of bothersome in a way, because I think those programs are great for students. But I also understand that sort of the cost impact is significant, and the transportation piece is a little bit challenging. But we do want our students to have some of those opportunities as well. Cost challenges, there are a few, okay? I mean, 1% decrease is great. We are still upgrading and raising the bar in our science program, okay? So you'll see, there's some materials and resources and equipment that have to be updated. They're consumable, intensive, lots of supplies go in there, and they're not cheap when you're looking at AP programs and Project Lead the Way programs. It's a little tough to say this, but we have an aging plant here. It's 18 years old, and some of the reflections in costs you'll see are replacing equipment, locks in the locker rooms. They're now at the point you can hit them with your hand and open a locker, and so that's across both the boys and girls PE locker rooms, the athletic rooms. We have range hoods in the family and consumer science area, which are, they were here at the start of the building. They have pointed corners, and if you're my height, you walk in there, it's an attractive nuisance. You bump into them, so we have some guys in there who are pretty good size. We have some mannequins that need to be replaced in the PE, first aid, and CPR, and that's kind of unique because those mannequins now are technology intensive. So when kids are doing chest compressions, they actually plug them into a computer to see if they're doing them at the right rate. We have to replace a spindle sander in our tech ed classroom. I actually found out today that we have a bad drill press in there, but we're going to figure out how to replace that without impacting things much. You're also going to see a new piano in the music department for $5,000. They've tried to offset that against some other cuts that they've been able to make, but our current piano is in a little bit of rough shape with a key that can't be tuned, and the front board is broken, so they've got some challenges there. A little bit of, in our guidance department, an increase there related to, we want to do some standard assessments across 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. So we want to bring in some SAT or PSAT 9th grade and 10th grade testing. So there are some costs there. The library commons, there's a little bit of an impact, but they've done a nice job, I think, in prioritizing those outside of the budget here. So we have relatively some technology-intensive costs in the library with respect to going away from hard copies of books and things like that and going to e-books. So that's increased our costs a little bit. And then, of course, Corey mentioned the lacrosse program, adding a new lacrosse team. While the coaches aren't in there, you have transportation costs related to that, uniform costs, and costs of equipment for taping ankles and those types of supplies as well. So, I mean, that's a broad overview here, but I'd be more than happy to answer any questions related to specific items in that budget.
So just, you talked about the drill press and the spindle, whatever. Is that different than what someone, like a home...
Yeah, a spindle sander is used for wood turning project. So it's a sander that's got a big base on it, and you kind of hold things against it. It wobbles, okay? And that's about a $1,200 piece of equipment. Our drill press, if you talk with our current tech ed teacher, who is pretty knowledgeable, he knows what a good tool is and what a bad tool is. And one of the drill presses we have in there is just, again, the chuck's gone, the switch is broken. He can get a decent commercial one that will last, he argues, for the next 20 to 25 years for about $700. Now, this is a big standing upright drill press. So these are things that, I mean, they have a shelf life, and particularly when you're looking at students and how they use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they become a little bit...
I was mostly curious, only because my father-in-law was big into woodworking, and he has those. He doesn't anymore because he gave them away. So it just made me think, is this something, if somebody out there is into that and is, getting rid of, is it...
I think when you look at using them in a shop with students, you want to make sure you have decent tools, and that's one of the challenges. But you can also buy good tools secondhand, okay, that will last you a long time, good commercial tools secondhand. And so I think that's what John's goal is, to get some decent tools at a good price secondhand.
I was just curious, only because, like I said, I have a personal experience where my father-in-law just emptied out his workshop of all really nice equipment. The other question I have, so you talked about the PSATs.
Yeah.
So explain again what the added cost is, because kids have taken the PSATs
Correct.
in the 9th and 10th grade before,
Yep.
so what's
Actually,
the difference?
Correct. 10th grade, what happens is, the state has been paying for the SATs, okay? We pay for the writing portion of the SATs, but that's for juniors, so it's mandated that juniors take those tests. 10th graders are not mandated to take the PSATs. They take that willingly, they take that on their own. There's also an 8-9 PSAT, which allows you to test your 8th grade students or 9th grade students. What this does is, if we pay for this, is it provides us 3 common assessments over a 3-year time period that we really can get a sense of growth over time for those students, number one. 2, it gives those students some real meaningful data as they move forward in this process. I will say that I'm not a huge testing advocate. It frustrates me greatly in the loss of class time, but it provides you a nice common set of data that you can look at with a group of students over the 3 years of their high school experience. So we just think that this is a lot better than comparing one grade from 8th to 9th. It just, this 9, 10, 11, if we can see a common assessment that we can work with students on, it provides us maybe with some more meaningful data for those students.
The other question I had, when we looked at transportation for, I think it was transportation, there's an increase in athletics. Do we go to all the preseason, postseason? I know we plan that we're going to do at least 2 preseason and a couple of post. So this increase, where does it come from?
Okay.
And are we assuming we're going to make the state meet in every sport?
To some degree, you have to assume some tournament activity. And if you look at what we've just done currently,
You do pretty good.
Our teams have been really successful. So they've been last night I went to Plymouth to watch our girls' volleyball team. So that's a 2-hour trip up there, it's 2 hours waiting around, it's 2 hours back, and when you're paying $50+ an hour for transportation. So the hope is we're going to lots of tournament games, but this is again one of those things that you can't accurately get a number on. We do know with one of the things that wasn't done in the past, and Jared did it this year, is he included the preseason games in the budget, okay? In the past, there were out of self-revenue activities. I told him to put it in here. It's a reflection of what is a typical cost of running an athletic program. It's your preseason games, your games, and then your tournament games. With the tournament games, you have to budget something. It's the question that Carrie asked, how much do you actually budget? We know we have to budget additionally for lacrosse for the boys and girls, and that's about $9,000 in transportation costs. Okay? Then there's a couple of $1,000 more, which are tournament games and also increases in what we're talking about, the transportation fees, is increases in the fees for the transportation. Yeah.
Anybody have any questions?
How is wrestling funded?
That's a school sport.
It is?
It is. It was a self-revenue initially when they first started it, and then the district assumed the cost for it. That's how lacrosse began. Lacrosse was a self-revenue, they generated their own revenue, and then this year, the school board agreed to pick it up as a school sport.
It's usually like 5 years that they do
I
self-funded.
seem to recall there was a Warren article, that's all. There was a debate at the deliberative about the Warren article and getting it down to $1.
That was back when football was an issue.
No.
No, I wasn't here for football. It was definitely another sport.
I wasn't here for
But
that.
I remember the angst associated with football, and I want to make sure we don't end up in a similar situation.
Lacrosse has been here for 5 years. It'll be fun.
Any other? I don't know if this is the right place to ask it or if it's curriculum. I notice in the 3 schools now, we're back to textbook replacement to account for lost and not returned one. For a while, it was in curriculum, now it's back out. So how do we get these numbers? How do we calculate them?
The challenge is that when students lose their books and pay for those books, we don't go and buy a new book, okay? That money goes into a fund, and then at the next school year, they look at what they have and what they don't have. I think it's a best guess looking at what happens at the end of a school year. Yeah, but we can't take that money at the end of the school year because we don't know what we're going to need until we get to the summer months and the start of the new school year. Yeah.
We will have a little bit more detail on that, perhaps that.
That's what I mean. It might be a curriculum question because for a while it was in curriculum, now it's back out. So I just want to understand like where the numbers come from on all 3 schools and
curriculum.
I know Corey's writing down a few more. We'll have a little bit more detail on that in the next
Okay,
meeting.
thank you. Any other Campbell High School questions?
I have one question. In a few places, there is an information access fee for lynda.com, and lynda.com is something that's offered through the library here in town, and that you can gain access to, and I believe every person who works in Litchfield can get a library account. And so I'm just wondering if that's something that they can access and not have to have that be something that we're then paying extra for.
I do not know the answer to that question.
Come back with the answer. I don't either.
Yeah.
Good question. Thank you.
The library thanks you too, their user numbers will go up.
I just used it last year. I utilized Linda through the library to access all the classes.
Oh, that's interesting. When you were teaching last year? Oh, that's awesome. Okay, yeah, no, absolutely, we'll look into that.
All right, any other questions, comments on Campbell High School? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
And it looks like Elemis is up next.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hello. Hi there.
Okay. Thank you all. It's good to be back here again. Year flew by. Good thing we're not getting any older. So I'll give an overview. I want to start off just kind of an overview of kind of the last year before I get into the next year. And just sort of recognize, I think, this process goes so quickly, the years fly by, and sometimes pausing just to kind of reflect on what we're doing with last year's numbers that we talked about this year. So first of all, I want to thank you for your support around technology. That continues to be, as you heard, one of the driving priorities of much of our budget in the district. Last year, we did add, and over the course of now this year, this school year, added some Chromebook labs to the middle school, which has really benefited our programming in a lot of ways. We now have a lab at each grade level, which we're sort of mentioning that we already have quite a few Chromebooks in the middle school. But that has done a lot to support our instructional programs around especially language arts, reading currently, and many of our resources, curriculum resources, are now web digital-based resources. So it has really allowed us to tap into a lot of those digital resources, which is very efficient and also supports the 21st century learner. So that has been really helpful. The other area last year that we spent a lot of time talking about was STEAM programming in general, science, technology, engineering, mathematics programming at the middle school and in the district. And we've made many advancements over the last few years, but particularly around science and Project Lead the Way, which we talked about last year. Project Lead the Way actually supports a number of different areas, specifically science, but also engineering. And we've been able to bring in the past year some coding for students and just some very up-to-date sort of practices in the classrooms and in instruction that is really preparing our kids for a world that, quite honestly, the jobs that may not even exist right now. So that's been a real help to those teachers and to the programs in science and technology. In this year's budget, as now we look at this next year, you will see reductions around Project Lead the Way because, as we had talked about last year, we had purchased new kits. Those new kits are now in place, and so now we're down to really just sustaining those kits year to year. So there are reductions mainly in the science and tech ed area, but we also, in computer literacy, we also we run one unit, Project Lead the Way, there. In terms of right now at the middle school, and you've heard me over the years talk about middle school programming, how middle school programming is different than elementary and high school programming. Being the middle school principal, I'm going to just spend a minute and just kind of remind you of kind of where we are with our our programming, how we run things at the middle school. So I think you know that when kids go from the elementary level to the middle level, they're really in a learning to read mode at the elementary level. The content increases, the content reading particularly increases significantly as they go through the middle school, and the content really becomes the driving force behind our program. So, at an elementary level, it's more of a generalist, typically, that's teaching multiple content areas. As they go through the middle school, it's a content-specific model. So, on our teams, we have content-specific specialists, and I think that's really important. I think, we just got our science data last couple weeks ago, and it was the highest kneecap number I've seen since I've been at the middle school. So certainly that's partly due to the Project Lead the Way and some of that stuff, but I think it's also a tribute to that focus on those content areas. At the middle school, and I know we have declining enrollment, I'm not blind to that, but one of the things that I think, and I mentioned this last year, and last January, the state released their latest per student cost. This is the official Department of Ed per student cost for the state, but really focusing on middle level. The average per student cost, tuition cost, state average is $14,295, $14,295. It's the state average to instruct a middle school student for their learning. At our school, we average $12,770. So that's about little over $1,500 below the per student cost. Now you multiply that out by our enrollment, that gets your number around $600,000 below the state average. And I just want to paint that picture because I think those of you that have been at the table, you know that we present at the middle school. We've always presented a very conservative budget, but I think it's important to, we are still well below that state average, and we come to you with a very conservative budget. With that being said, now, over the next year, we will be reducing 2 positions at the middle school. And I think that I can't tell you it's not going to have an effect on our programming. It is going to impact our program. It's going to impact that specific content specialist model. So we're going to have to look at having teachers maybe teach more than one content area, things like that. But that becomes a challenge that affects programming. So I just think that's important to have that context. We don't have a lot of specialists and tutors at the middle school. We don't have like a math tutor or enrichment specialist, things like that. So there is a big responsibility on the classroom teacher to differentiate, to be sort of that, we have different tiers of interventions, and so when we have our identified population, which Devin talked about, but we also have a population that score, they're in that below proficient range. We don't specifically have special ed funding for those kids, but we really need to provide interventions to them. We call those tier 2 interventions, and we do that more and more now through technology, but that really does become a challenge when we don't have some of those tutor positions and specialist positions. So that's just something to think about in the context of the program at the middle school and what we provide. I'm very proud of where we are right now. In Mr. O'Neill's comments regarding the priorities of the district, I can't help but smile back there because 2 out of 3 of those, they all affect the middle school, but 2 out of 3 directly affect the middle school. Namely, the one-to-one model is very exciting, and then the learning commons. So I'll talk about the one-to-one model just for a minute. We have increased the technology significantly over the last several years and the way we're using that in the classroom. I think the exciting part of bringing in a one-to-one model right now is that we have the infrastructure really well set up in terms of our curriculums and in terms of the curriculum resources. You might have heard us talking about Study Sync. That's the ELA, the language arts resource we use for grades 6 through 8. That has a web-based, digital-based component to it that the teachers are using. But having the one-to-one model will allow us to use that in an even more efficient way. Project Lead the Way. So a lot of these resources that we're talking about, and Mr. Lonigan mentioned, we'll be transitioning away from some of those paper traditional resources into more of the digital-based resources. You'll see some changes in the budget in the upcoming years as a result of that one-to-one model. The other thing that's really important, I think, at the middle level is that transition going, again, from where they are as elementary school students and then almost high school students 4 years from the time they enter. But that transition is really important for the kids in terms of how they are accessing information. And, I think the traditional school model years ago was you go to school to retain information, to receive information. And now the 21st century model is much more interactive, and that one-to-one model is going to allow us to do more with that. And then the Learning Commons, I won't bore you with all the details of a Learning Commons model, but Mr. O'Neill gave you the overview on that. Really, it is about making the library, as you know it, the center of learning in the building, and that when you look at companies like Google and Apple and different companies and how they set up their office spaces, how they set up their collaboration spaces, that's really where this model came from. So they looked at corporate America, kind of what's been changing, and it's changed a lot over the last 20 years, and that really becomes the model of the Learning Commons. So it's very collaborative, there's a technology base to it. It goes away from a traditional lab setting. 15, 20 years ago, when computers were really moving into schools, it was, okay, we're going to have a computer lab over here, and the kids are going to line up in rows, and they're going to work on their computers. This model is much more interactive. There's a lot of, as was said, a lot more movement. It's sort of, okay, I have an essential question I need to answer, I have a problem I need to solve, and this is going to be a tool to get me there. So the technology really is a tool. It's a vehicle to interact and to increase learning, but it is not the end. So just by putting a one-to-one model or a Learning Commons model in the middle school is not going to, that in and of itself, create learning. It's that interactive piece and that collaborative piece, which is the Learning Commons model does a lot with that. We've already made some transitions significantly to that end this year. We are partnered with Plymouth State University. Amy Provenzel, our librarian, is working with them, and they've given us recommendations on how sort of they want to, what their recommendation is to roll this out. And they've worked with a lot of districts around the state. They did Amherst Learning Commons last year, worked with them. And the exciting thing is a lot of this doesn't have big budget impacts. It is in our strategic plan. It is not in the budget in front of you. So I just wanted to provide that context for you. I know some of you are in our schools and or have children getting close to the middle school. That gives you some level of a context to that. In terms of an overview of some of the lines in the budget, so you, as I mentioned, Project Lead the Way is a reduction in a few areas. You will see in music, so our focus on STEAM, the science, technology, the A is arts in STEAM. So to that end, Carolyn Late is the band director for LMS and CHS, and by having more of a global view of things this year, she has been able to spend some time looking at the vertical alignment between the middle and the high school. And so to that end, she looked, and there are some instruments that she feels to be competitive, and we're very proud of our music program in the district, but to be competitive at some of the competitions we go to and festivals, that there were a few instruments she felt that would provide our students with those opportunities. So we are looking at what you've got in the music line there is a 5-year lease. That would be the first year, $2,800 roughly for that. And again, that's a 5-year lease for those instruments. The other area that there was a smaller increase was in reading, and I was talking about the Tier 2 interventions, those interventions for those students who are below proficient that need some supports. We are putting more of our funds toward those digital-based, like RAS Kids, Reading Plus. You'll see some of those programs listed under reading. I think that covers most of the changes from the current year. And if you have any general questions about that, or
I think first, congratulations on your science scores.
Thank you.
I think we
Yeah,
need
that
to
was exciting.
broadcast that.
Yeah.
So you do have at least one dedicated technology classroom. So how is that going to change?
Okay, so so there's a few things. When we look at programming from the elementary school to the middle to the high school, there's a few things that we look at in terms of our ICT curriculum. And there are skills that students need at the elementary level They now have, they have a lab down there, so the students come up with some keyboarding skills and just some basic skills navigating the internet and different things that they didn't used to come up with. So they now have a pretty good baseline. Our computer literacy class will still exist as a vehicle to get them to that next level with coding is actually one piece of that. Project Lead the Way is part of that. Students are making apps now in that class. So those kind of things that then align to the high school program and sort of transition them over time into that model, into the curriculum at the high school, that will still exist. So there's still going to be a computer literacy class. Over time, our vision is to move more and more toward a technology integration model. So we have a support of technology integration into our classrooms and into the Learning Commons. But we still feel strongly that they need that. They need those skills. And so the curriculum, we have competencies K-12 for ICT, but the middle school will still support those competencies through the computer lit class. We also have an 8th grade class called Literacy with Technology. I've probably talked about that before. That is a class that takes place in a computer lab. So that's, and then the library, we also have a lab at the library, so in the library. So that lab in the library, while it is going to, the physical look of that is going to change, the plan right now, correct me if I'm wrong, is that would still exist. In that technology would still exist in there. There are some things that those machines do that a Chromebook cannot do. They have, like, for example, that app maker is not something you can run on a Chromebook, so they need to run that on a PC type computer.
So the last time I was in the middle school library, it's really crowded.
It is.
So how are we going to make that happen?
Okay, so we're looking at the space behind so if you've been in our library, there are 2 classrooms that are interior classrooms behind there.
Yes.
Okay, we're looking to start to move and migrate some of our, for example, the technology into that space. Some of these collaborative areas, one of the things Mr. Neal mentioned was that, you're going to have students, there's some areas where they're collaborating, so they're making some noise. There's still going to be a need for some students not to be in an area where there's noise. So that's the plan right now, is to start to migrate toward that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any comments, questions about the middle school? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And next is GMS.
Good evening, everyone.
Welcome.
Did you do all these? Thank you.
Wherever you want to begin.
We had 3 big areas in the budget that were a focus. Like the other schools in the district, they were one-to-one technology as a hybrid model. The full-day kindergarten, and in addition, the Learning Commons. All of those things take a slightly different presentation at the elementary level. Mr. Lecklider just mentioned that the students are coming up to the middle school with technology skills which they did not have in years past. In 2013, as I recall, is when we passed the warrant article, the voters passed the warrant article, to install a computer lab and also to have a half-time technology teacher at GMS. That's been a static situation. We would like to expand that position to full-time, but when we prioritize where we are is something that we've had to postpone, and I understand that, and I accept that. However, in the initial model, we had, the design was that that teacher would teach 3rd and 4th grade. computer skills so that every third and fourth grader would have their first formal experience with IT training. Through creative scheduling and also by refocusing the position on direct student teaching instead of tech integration, which was the other part of the original design. And what that means is being a resource for classroom teachers for using technology. We've been able to add computer class for grade 2 for the last 2 years. So now we have computer class for grades 2, 3, and 4. What we do not have is computer class for K and 1. And I'm focusing on technology at the beginning, but I want to talk a bit about the hybrid model. What we observe with our students is that they come into kindergarten and first grade and they're really good with touchscreen applications. They could play, well, everyone gets that right away. What they're not so good at is doing anything on a QWERTY keyboard. And when we think of what academic computing is about, in our building at least, and in our district, it's using a QWERTY keyboard. And so the hybrid model is an attractive idea. In fact, I have talked to Dr. Childress about the possibility of our kindergarten and first grade students, if we had iPads or something like that, where they could actually take some of the standardized assessments on a touch screen, I think that the results could be significantly different. As our first year with SBAC testing, I worry often that what we're really getting results for is our students' technology skills, not their reading and math skills.
Yeah.
Because I observed the first graders doing the NWEA map tests on a Chromebook, which is a big step forward because we now have 2 Chromebook carts, a regular keyboard cart, and the lab. So we certainly have more technology. But the students' frustration was that, I can't say specifically what the question was, but in order to show his understanding of reading, he had to perform a keyboard skill of dragging an object from a toolbar onto an object on the screen. And he was doing this with a built-in mouse on a Chromebook. The point is that our students don't have training or experience in either using a built-in mouse or an external mouse either. What they know how to do is things on a touch screen. So I do think it's worth looking into moving toward that model. We are very excited about increased opportunities in technology. A number of our students came to CHS to go to the Google Classroom workshop last summer. We now have 2 Chromebook carts, so they're able to use those. The computer lab is still intact, and it is available for classroom use after 12 o'clock when grade 2 has finished their special. And I see teachers in there all the time, both for testing, because that's a site they can go to that, but also to do projects with the students as a group. So more about the technology model. The Learning Commons is really about the concept that students have independent skills to use computers or to use technology in the library setting. In our building, as was pointed out, we have the library space itself is rather small and very constricted in its functionality, because what we have is we have bookshelves on the exterior walls, and then we have stacks in the middle of the floor, leaving a long, thin space where we have tables and chairs. Mrs. Pavel-Tamel does a great job of using each of the areas, so the students do come in and we have very high usership of books in the library, about 17,000 checkouts a year, which is huge. In addition, we have a gathering area where she'll read books to the children. And in addition, they can use the tables and chairs, which are suitable size, and work in groups or that kind of thing. I'm conceiving the computer lab as part of our Learning Commons because it is two things. That's where the technology is in our library. We don't have dedicated computers in the library. And it also is what used to be the back end of the library. It originally was the library. So I see that whole big area as the Learning Commons. I have been talking with the staff about different ways to use the library, both in teams and as the whole faculty. We are going to try to arrange a visit to the primary school in Hollis, where they actually do some Learning Commons kinds of things. And so we're trying to get there as we have the technology and as we have the resources to do that. So one of the things in the budget is actually movable bookshelves, which would allow us to use the existing library space in a really flexible way. Right now, there isn't a lot of option. They're fixed and they're books on both sides. Okay, so moving on to what for me is the centerpiece of my budget, which is full-day kindergarten. Full-day kindergarten is the norm in most New Hampshire schools. I have some numbers here because I know you love numbers and I want to get them right, so I'm going to refer to my notes. On the national level, in 2015, 38% of 3-year-olds, 67% of 4-year-olds, and 80% of 5-year-olds were enrolled in pre-primary programs. Those rates were pretty similar to the year 2000. While the percentage of students in full-day preschool programs did not change a lot over those 15 years, among those students attending kindergarten, the percentage increased from 60% to 81%. So nationally, those students enrolled in kindergarten, 81% of them by 2015 were full-day. Mr. O'Neill mentioned that 75% of districts offered full-day kindergarten. That was true in New Hampshire in 2015. In the next school year, Berlin, Bow, Campton, Claremont, Gorham, Randolph, Shelburne Cooperative, Interlakes, Milan, Mont Vernon, Newfound Area, Newmarket, Plainfield, Shaker Regional, along with several private academies, all added full-day kindergarten the last year that statistics were available. We're definitely behind the curve in adding full-day kindergarten in Litchfield. The addition of state aid is going to help offset the cost, and I think it's a great opportunity that we as a community need to take. I believe it's really important. The State Board of Education wrote in 2011, the benefits of positive early experiences build one on top of another as skill begets skill. Early experiences literally shape how the brain gets built. A strong foundation in the early years increases the probability of positive outcomes. A weak foundation increases the odds of later difficulties. Remedial education, clinical treatment, and other professional interventions are more costly and produce less desirable outcomes than the provision of nurturing, protective relationships, and appropriate learning experiences earlier in life. And this is the sentence I love. It is more efficient, both biologically and economically, to get things right the first time than to try to fix them later. I think we all understand that. And the way it's going to change is if we have a full-day kindergarten program. Our incoming first grade numbers are tested in September, as I just mentioned, and we make decisions based on those incoming scores. We take them with a grain of salt when we see that they have technological difficulty, but we're required by law to respond when we see a student with difficulty. The other big challenge in GMS as far as grade 1 is the stability of the cohort moving from K to 1. I've reported many times in the past, and you're familiar with the number of students who add to our cohort going into grade 1. This year, we currently have 67 students in grade 1 in 4 classrooms, and 24 of those students are new since last June. So what does that mean? It means they're coming into grade 1 with a variety of experiences, uneven learning, and a common expectation to begin with. So it is a challenge, and I think it's really important that we move ahead with that if we can. You asked about half-day options. It is in the RSA that any school that decides to offer full-day kindergarten does have to offer parents a half-day option. So the reason for that is that the state did not change by bringing us full-day kindergarten funding. They did not change the mandatory age of attendance. So it still is 6 to 18. So parents don't actually have to send their children to kindergarten at all if they choose not to, and they can choose a half-day. And if they do that, the solutions would be, if we have a large number of students who do that, we could create one section of half-day kindergarten and have a program very much like we currently have. If we have a few students who choose to do that, then we probably would disperse them among the other classes. And I would think that we would put them in the afternoon so that they would have specials, because I believe we have to offer them the same program. The downside of that is that special in a full-day program would be longer than it is for in a half-day program, and so there would be less actual instruction time for reading, math, and social skills and play and all of those things that also go into it. So I think that the ideal situation would be to have a program in the morning and then offer a special to those students who are half-day. So I've considered all of those options.
Can you, and not right now, is it possible to get, I know some of these are startup costs, things that we need to provide this year that are not going to be ongoing costs. Can we get an idea at some point of what are going to be the one-year costs and what we're not going to, need to purchase again next year or the year after?
There is and I provided earlier, it's with my summary and stuff, there's a listing of infrastructure costs, technology, teaching, all that stuff that's listed in there. It breaks out what the first year initial setup comes in.
Perfect.
I will say too that some of those numbers, as we say, like, we're still waiting on firm quotes on some of the setup costs from our general contractor. There's some adjustment to that may take place, and final numbers from the modular classroom vendor. I'm also expecting those within the next week or so. So there are some things in there that may change as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
And do we have any idea from I know in the past we've done like a pulse of the community for what our enrollment looks like. Do we have any idea what full-time versus part-time, or have we not explored that? What it would look like if
We have not done a poll to ask that question. We generally don't begin kindergarten enrollment till January, which is already way beyond when parents are thinking of it. But, we push to try, so we have some real numbers.
If I had to guess, I think a majority of parents would opt for the full-time. I think it'd be very rare.
I've heard some people say that they would not at all. So my question for the school board is, why is the rationale as to why this is in the budget and is not a warrant article? Of something of this magnitude, this large of a change, why are we not asking the voters for their support?
You want to take that? We haven't discussed it as a board yet.
Well, I think that there's two reasons I think that are appropriate. First of all, we already have kindergarten in the public schools. And secondly, I believe there was a vote for full-day kindergarten that was taken earlier if there was financial availability to do that. And I would suggest that this year, between what the state is funding us and what we're capable of doing without any kind of a major change, well, 3% increase in the budget, that we do have the financial capacity to do without overloading the community. So from where I sit, at least, I do believe that we have both current program in existence, and we have already
taken some point half-time programs and made them full-time. And also, we have the community support previously.
Well, I think that's an interesting idea, because I was here when they did the kindergarten thing, and there's a discussion as to what that vote actually meant and how people were instructed as to what that vote meant. But at the similar time, there was a warrant article that stated that voters were directing the Budget Committee and the school board for expansion of programs, part-time to full-time, number of hours, added positions, added programming, was to be put forth to the voters for approval. So it's a similar time as the whole initial kindergarten vote. So I would expect that if we're going to follow one vote, we should follow the other vote, which says voters need to at least be asked. If there's the community support, it'll pass. Great, have at it. But in my opinion, the voters deserve the right. They've instructed us to ask, and so we should follow through with that. As for the funding, my understanding is that funding is dependent upon Keno revenues. Is that correct?
I believe that the way the funding law is written is that the Keno revenues will be used in the funding, that there is a guarantee of $1,100 per year in funding, and then if Keno revenues brings in additional monies, then there would be additional funding until we get up to the guaranteed amount of the adequacy, which I believe is around $3,600. We currently get $1,800 per kindergarten enrollee, and if we had $1,100 more, that would bring us up to $2,900. And then I believe that if the Keno funding brought in more money, we would get up to the full $3,600 per student. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
But there is a minimum guaranteed, because I'm not going to bet on betting, so I'm not going to bet that that money is going to be there or not. But if there is a...
Keno, you'll have plenty of money to play with.
I don't...
We have to all support Keno.
For the children. But from a budgetary perspective, I'm not going to bet that that revenue is going to be there. So long as there is a guaranteed minimum, then at least we have something to work with, but...
I believe that is accurate. We will double check that, but that is my and Corey's interpretation of the RSA.
All right. I have other comments, but they can wait.
I just had a question on co-curricular transportation. It looks as though we've added the costs for these field trips, but I feel like those field trips have always been offered, so how have we paid for it in the past?
Parents. So our field trips all have to be tied to curriculum objectives. So right now, the way it works is that the PTO donates a flat amount to GMS, which is prorated among all students. This year, the contribution, and last, I believe, was $1,000. And they do that just out of the kindness of their heart. You know, obviously, they're not the funding source for school programs, but they do fund quite a bit. And so that comes to about $2.20 per student. But these trips are very expensive, and relatively. So the students will still have to pay, the parents will still have to pay admission fees, but I felt it was really important to try to support the trips and the cost of the trips directly in the school budget. So these are the three most expensive. It's Squam Lake, the Museum of Science, and they're all at different grade levels. And then the other one is the annual trip for the 4th grade to the State House.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, thank you.
And last but not least, it looks as though technology is next.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I know that we've been hearing a lot about technology and how the district goals surround technology, but I also want you guys to also know that for FY19, we also wanted to look at how we're doing the one-to-one, talking about the middle school one-to-one, and how this really changes our needs in the district as far as technology goes. And we looked to next year and then also into the future to see what we can do in our data centers and throughout the district to not only increase how technology is being used and its efficiency, but also to see how we can decrease numbers in our budget. By doing the one-to-one and seeing in the future how we're going to be able to upgrade connectivity and whatnot, we were able to change our 5-year replacement plan for this year and basically save over $50,000 on what it originally would have been because of the one-to-one. And then also at the other schools for the following year and then the year after that, we were also able to decrease around another $50,000 at each of those years as well because of the one-to-one and because of increasing the speeds and connectivity. I also want to note that if you add in that spend ahead, like Corey said earlier, the technology budget, even with all of this addition to the one-to-one and everything like that, it's actually looks like it's about an $18,000 decrease in what our budget would typically be. It's almost a 4% decrease. So we're adding all these things. We're giving the students more technology, but we're still also decreasing that, the cost. And also by removing certain things we can, in other parts of the budget, we can save other thousands of dollars in licensing fees and everything else. The one other shift that you'll see in our budget this year is at one point we had $7,200 for replacing projectors and smart boards at CHS, but you didn't see that at LMS or GMS. So what we did this year, because we've been replacing a lot of old projectors lately, I actually replaced one this week. We replaced 2 before school even started at one at GMS and one at LMS. So what I did was I moved that $7,200 at CHS because we're pretty well set for the most part for right now for next year, and reallocated, split in half for the other 2 schools to help build them up and get them to where we are at the high school. You know, the technology changes very quickly, but in a way we can look at how by these technology changes we can decrease a lot of that stuff, and then also looking forward to textbooks and everything else.
So I have a question, and it may not even be a question that you can answer. It may be more the administration or the school board. 2 years ago, we spent ahead about $300,000 at the end of 2016. This past year, we spent $167,000 ahead. So some of the increases we see in this budget, why can't we spend ahead this year?
Well, are you asking?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, you know, say even the kindergarten at 30, whatever that is. Why can't we, as we get towards the end of the year, just plan, since we know that those numbers are much smaller than 2017, 2016 spend ahead, why can't we plan on doing some of that?
I think a lot of those areas where we're thinking about spend ahead, because I look at spend ahead and management of fund balance, kind of the same idea.
Yep.
So those strategic items that we've identified on those on these lists, those are based on the priorities of the districts and maybe some other things that we might be able to do. We would prioritize the one-to-one technology where we pulled that out of the operating budget for LMS. If we can address that through management of the fund balance, we would do that. Also, the Learning Commons model, the same thing, we pulled from the operating budget, trying to keep the main focus on kindergarten. And as we get closer to year end and we can identify what the fund balance looks like, I mean, we returned $485,000 this year. I mean, if we can do some things through management of the fund balance and get us to a point where we're not returning $500,000 and our budget is more conservative from year to year, I think we're heading in that direction as a district. That'd be my comment to that. I think because we spent those things ahead last year, I mean, it was a little bit before my time. I'm somewhat familiar with the things that they spent ahead on. It doesn't change the 5-year plan that Jason hasn't going forward. So whether we spend ahead to try and address some of those things and reduce that budget for next year, it doesn't really change the total amount we need to spend to maintain that 5-year plan.
Over the 5-year plan. we've done a really good job of spending ahead, and it's been a priority. So the Budget Committee has fully funded technology, only to find at the end of the year it's pulled out and not in the budget after all. It's been bought, but it hasn't been needed in the budget. So as we now are presented with this technology budget, how do we know, again, this is a priority, we need this $130,000.
So I
Why
think-
is it, what guarantees do we have, or why should we leave that 130 there when it's, for the last 2 years, it's been spent ahead and left a gap in the budget?
My understanding of the spend ahead was to address concerns that the school district had in terms of special educations, where there might be some areas of concern that we might not have the money in FY18 to cover all the expenses that might be coming related to special ed. So that's my understanding of what the spend ahead was in this previous year. I can't speak to the year before. I'm not familiar with that year, but.
And that's why I said it may be a school board, it may be a superintendent issue, but I've been very clear the last 2 years of bringing this up, that it's been budgeted, it's been a priority. The Budget Committee has not touched it out of consideration for it being a priority. And then to find in June that out of unexpended funds, they all get bought. In other words, it wasn't needed in the following year's budget as a technology expense. That's happened 2 years in a row. So that's why I look at this $130,000 increase and I say, they've been able to do it for the last 2 years, why can't we do it for a third year?
If I can, I think I understand your question, and I'm going to try to answer it this way. The budget reflects what we believe are our top priorities, and in that $130,000 are our top priorities. And then we have the strategic component of the budget, which reflects our priorities that are not reflected in the budget. And we're hopeful that the fund balance will be such that it will support our strategic priorities and also, if need, perhaps some of the IT numbers that are in there. Our problem is we never can guarantee that we will have the fund balance to expend ahead. So what we have to do is to include that $130,000 in our current budget in case the fund balance is zero, for instance. That was the worst case scenario. Now you can go back and look since I've been here, and that we've never been close to zero. I mean, quite candidly, it's been way too much money. We're trying to budget a lot tighter, as Cora suggested. We took $200,000 out of the transition money this year. You had recommended that last year. And are we going to be coming in really, really, really tight? The answer is no, that would not be prudent either, because we don't have any money, as towns do, to fall back on, and we can't deficit spend. So we have to have some degree of flexibility within the total budget in case we have some unanticipated events. So it's a combination of things, Cindy. I'll try to give you a little bit better answer perhaps, but that would be my best shot at an answer for this evening.
Okay. Anybody have comments or questions about the technology budget?
Not yet.
All right, again, if you have questions during the week, funnel them to me and I'll forward them on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of tonight's superintendent.
Are you going to do the same format this year as you did last year, where your questions will be at the beginning of the next meeting on the presentation this evening? Or are we going to hold off until everything is done and then have one evening with all the questions on all budget lines?
What I would like to do is have them, as they come in, send them to you, and as answers are available, funnel them back so people have a chance to absorb them. We're actually, I think, pretty lucky. We have a meeting tonight, we have a meeting next week, then we have 2 weeks off. So I would hope that before the Thanksgiving break, all of people's questions will have been asked, so that we don't have last-minute questions right before we're supposed to make decisions.
Thank you.
That's my goal.
So we can anticipate that we will get formal questions through a written process that we will develop formal answers to, and then we will bring those answers back to you. And do you want those to be answered on an ongoing basis, or do you want us to wait until that meeting?
I would like ongoing. I think it helps people better absorb the information.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining the process. So next week, we'll have the presentations by the remaining groups, and then we will start to respond to any questions you might have.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sounds good. All right,
Are we dismissed at this point?
you are all done for tonight. Thank you very much. We will see a variety of you people next week.
Stay longer, but...
I know. The next item is town reports. I'm going to actually skip over that unless John has anything burning that he needs to report on.
Nothing burning. I can send it to you though, so you can share it. That's good.
Okay. Just keeping an eye on the time, it's 1 minute before 9, so.
Maybe we should book the auditorium for that one.
Okay.
But did they have an outcome of the insurance thing? Whether
Is that,
I do have an update on that.
okay.
I would be curious to see.
So they did a review of the new programs on Friday. The bargaining unit, the union, has taken that information and going back to their membership. I think it's on Tuesday night, and they'll come back with some decisions around that. Only other thing I would actually share with you is that obviously this past storm we just had has made a significant impact to our budget and our forecast that we talked about last week. Still, all the numbers are not in yet, but we'll have an update when that happens, probably by next week. Yeah,
That's this year's budget.
By the way, any trees that were on your list that made it through that storm stay. That's just what I'm saying.
My power didn't come back for a couple days, I'm like, this is all because...
Anyone that lived through that storm stay, you can take them out. They should not be cut down.
Don't worry.
Because the town will disappear before those trees go anywhere.
Which ones?
And you know how they told us about all the trees that were like in dire straits, and I like waited to.
Must have got uprooted.
That's what I'm saying.
The funny part of the storm was that our road agents probably spent a good 24 hours taking trees down. And basically cleaning trees up that fell down, so.
I saw them out there, and I
Yeah.
appreciate their hard work.
It's a lot of wood.
Yep.
Very much.
We could have a kick.
Big old bonfire.
Big bonfire.
So that's all it's needed. I'll send you the.
All right, thank you. Our member input, miscellaneous business.
I don't know if I'm getting all the emails, because I don't have the school budget, and I have to request access.
That's the guy you need to talk to.
Yeah, we go look for it.
Well, yeah, I don't,
So just,
Okay.
so usually with the minutes, I will send them to the chair and the chair will distribute them.
and I got that. Okay. I had to ask you for access to
Yeah, I
look
don't
at
get
it.
why that.
I've had to do that too, so I think it all depends.
If she
on
got
how
the chairs, she should get yours, I mean.
No, but like if you click on the
I send them
Google
to the
Docs
chair,
sometimes,
and the chair
sometimes-
distributes them, but she still has to ask me to share
Oh, I
them.
don't have that account.
Do you have more than one Gmail account?
I do,
That's why you're going on your other Gmail account?
Make sure, yeah.
Default.
but I set up a mail account just for this one.
You have to be
So it
logged
wouldn't-
into the Gmail account though, like. you have
So,
to-
yeah, when you
Yeah.
click the link to go to it, it will take your profile as your primary profile. So when you get there, you get to deny, go up to your little initials or name or picture, whatever it is, click on it and then select the
But
town's
it does
profile.
say the town profile. It says that I was
Okay.
not able to get it for J Green at
Right.
Litchfield, New
But are you
Hampshire.
logged into like that, because I have to go to the mail.google.com and then have to
Sounds like
actually
collusion
log
with the
in to
That's
the,
what I'm
like you have to choose the
What do you think,
user you're
John?
on at that
All
time.
right. It's
I'll
that
look
guy
into it
says,
more.
yeah, we'll blame Russia.
Yeah,
The Russians-
and
yeah,
I
Russians
might
are
have your
blind.
other email account, so I'll try to go in and forward that to your.
Yeah, so
other-
Julie, your town account does have permissions based on the budget committee distribution list. As long as permissions are granted to that distribution list, it should be fine.
The only other thing I'll tell you is you can auto-forward it to your
Now,
personal
if you're
account.
doing, because it's in your folder,
Then
and you
you
already
get
gave it
everything to your
once, you
personal
may
account.
want to go back and
If
reshare
someone's jumped
again.
to that, though, I'd be worried that I deleted it.
Okay,
I get everything.
well, I just I share with Cindy, because the chair
Yeah, and then I
distributes, yeah.
send it out.
I don't send it out to the committee,
Right.
I'll look at how it's being sent out then, because it's possible you're just not on it, because it was a share from a while ago and has to be re-added. I'll look at it.
I shared it tonight, though.
What was tonight?
But you,
Tonight, I just got your agenda.
Okay, and at 7:00, I think it was like 7:09 or something, I
7:08.
sent out the electronic. Huh.
got the budget stuff they sent you, right?
Yes.
I'm
So
telling
maybe
you,
she's
it
not
goes
on the
to a junk,
distribution list?
for me, it goes to a,
Yeah,
some of the stuff goes
it's
to a
by
junk.
budget
I will
committee.
log in.
Yeah, if she's not, maybe she's not associated with the budget committee web address.
But if you got,
She
the
is.
if you got the minutes though, because that's, I send that out the same way, so that's.
Weird.
That
So
is weird.
it's the
some of
Russians.
mine go to the primary and some of them go to a junk. It goes, it's called promotions.
If it's a document that's not already a Word doc, you're going back to a Google Doc, which I think is how some of your stuff comes across, then wherever that doc is shared has to be shared. Wherever the doc is stored has to be shared also.
Okay.
That's why you have to click it out, request for access. And then whoever is the owner of that doc gets an email saying she's asking
Somebody
for
wants
permission.
to-
Okay, so,
You must have gotten it, so, yes, okay.
Okay,
so
good.
if I share it with Cindy, she has to share it with everybody else.
You have to provide permissions to everybody she shares it with.
Okay, so
Exactly.
that's gonna kinda like mess up your distribution.
No, well, the only thing is when you share it, everybody's gonna get the
fine.
notification saying that it's been updated. I would recommend that you just share with the whole committee. There's no reason for it to be sent out again by Cindy, I don't think. I mean, you're
What
obviously.
I could do is I could email you and say, can I share this with the committee? Okay. Just so you have it on record.
Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Teasing that
Well, it's the bylaws, and I don't want
That
to...
was in your out loud voice.
All right, so if there's no other comments, questions?
Major adjourn.
Well, I have one thing, I won't be here next week.
I also won't be here.
Okay.
Rolling the dice in Vegas, baby.
So what you're gonna need,
Give me a number.
what you're gonna need to do then is make sure you watch the YouTube, because we do have time, like I said, we do have a couple of weeks, so watch it and get your questions in soon.
Quiz.
Did my quiz?
Ooh,
I don't like- I don't
I won't be
like
here the 2 weeks after that. Oh, wait, none of us will.
Did we get a second?
Here's something.
Christina.
So Chris made the motion.
I made the
think
motion.
Kelly seconded it to adjourn.